Arian. Hi.
Hi, good afternoon, and welcome to our webinar today about dynamic pricing. Tuning in here on Thursday, 3 p.m. from our office here in Rotterdam. And yeah, today, the coming 45 minutes, we are completely live again as usual on LinkedIn and YouTube. So pretty exciting. If you have any comments, questions, I'm there to answer them. And today, it's the topic about dynamic pricing, especially for retail and e-commerce. We had this webinar 2 years ago, but we decided to update this webinar with the latest learnings, the latest thoughts, and the lessons learned also from our side. So that's the topic of today, and also understanding and adapting to changing customer behavior by introducing the concept of hyperlearning. That's where we stand for. My name is Arjen Oosthoek, co-founder of Simpson, and today I will host the show about dynamic pricing. But first, let's start with the definition of dynamic pricing. We also shared it 2 years ago, and Arthur Cournot already came with this concept in the 19th century. I don't want to give a kind of a history lesson here, but it seems Antoine was a real pioneer and a real visionary, because if you can come with this concept in the 19th century without having all these data and technology in place, yeah, you really have a good vision about how the future will look like. It's especially here about the definition. I think dynamic pricing is used in a lot of different definitions, but he defined as the study of determining optimal selling prices of products and services in the settings where prices can easily and frequently be adjusted. And especially, I think I would like to highlight here, that's why it's green, optimal, because it really depends on what is optimal to the person you ask it. Like if you ask it to an e-commerce manager, it could be different than if you ask it to your financial colleague or to your marketing colleague. So having optimal in the definition, yeah, that could make a lot of different definitions as well to define what is the optimal price. Is it the lowest price? Is it the price for the highest margin, or is it the best price for the customer? That really depends on the definition. So there's a lot of freedom in this definition, and that's what we also would like to talk to in this webinar, because an optimal price for one customer is not the optimal price for the other customer, and the optimal price for your competitor is a different price than for you. Let's go over to the current state of the market. We have this webinar divided in 5 topics. First, we would like to share the kind of the current state of the market, especially the e-commerce market right now. Then I would like to share some practical cases with you, how you can use dynamic pricing in a practical way. Also would like to address some challenges in applying dynamic pricing, what we've seen in the past years in the market and also on our customer side. For the 5 topic is more about implementation, how to implement it, what are the lessons learned on that side. And I also would like to briefly touch about hyperlearning, what is it and how you can apply it into dynamic pricing. And as I said, we are completely live today. So if you have any questions, yeah, let's say the coming 35 minutes, I'm there by the end of the webinar to go through your questions to make it interactive. The current state of the market, I shared this this visual a week before for this webinar, and it's actually a well-known quote of Dane Orley, an economist and a professor of Stanford, and he has a well-known familiar quote about big data. Actually, I made a cross of it for dynamic pricing. The same is actually true for dynamic pricing, because from outside it looks like that every web shop or every e-commerce company is using dynamic pricing nowadays. But in practice, you see a lot of companies struggle to go beyond competitive pricing. Of course, competition is a really important driver, but it's really important not to solely focus on this competition. It's also really important to focus on the supply and demand, on the financial metrics. And in this webinar, I would like to give you insights how you can do that, and that you really can apply a dynamic pricing approach. And yeah, that's what the goal of the webinar right now. So I would like to make this webinar very interactive. So for the people that are attending, the question to you is, before we share any statistics of how many companies are applying dynamic pricing, is if you can just share a quick yes or no in the LinkedIn chat if you're already applying dynamic pricing. And of course, a yes means you're already applying it, and a no if you don't apply it yet. So looking forward to your response here, and to see if it is a kind of a representative to the overall market sentiment. On the next slide, you see the percentage. So we have 41% actually of the e-commerce companies that applied dynamic pricing last year. I expect it's kind of the same because we are only a little bit more than 2 months in the new year. So 4 out of 10 companies are using dynamic pricing nowadays. Yeah, 2 years ago, we also shared you the case of Amazon. I think it's quite a well-known case when it comes to dynamic pricing. Of course, it's a big player, but it gives a kind of a best practice how you can use it. They change their prices every 10 minutes, 2.5 million times a day. Of course, this is not for one product, but for all their products. And the overall business case is that they boosted their sales by 25%. 2 years ago, I shared you the visual you see on the next slide, and this is more the concept they introduced. You have to read this visual more from a chronological order. So what happens in their market? It's about selling a specific type of microwave. First, we had Sears. That's actually the purple line, and they were the first big competitor in the market, and they offered their microwave for a static price of 80.99. And when actually Best Buy came up with dynamic pricing, you see they have a very competitive price. So for most of the day, they had a more attractive price than Sears. But they introduced between 5 and 8 p.m. A new concept for the time based dynamic pricing. So they found out that between 5 and 8 p.m., there was a higher demand and a higher search behavior for microwaves, especially this type of microwave. So what they did is that they increased and they matched their price with Sears to avoid that they are losing margin on this high demand time slot. And that was, yeah, for them at that moment, the best price strategy. But then Amazon came up as a third alternatives, and they are changing their prices 9 times a day. And especially on that time when the demand is the highest, they have a more aggressive price strategy. They are the lowest, so they want to get a lot of market share when the demand is the highest. You see, on other time slot, they're not always the cheapest, and that's also the point I would like to make here. So you can include all kind of value drivers. In this case, it's demand. It's also about the time, but you don't always have to be the cheapest in the market. So it's also about determining what's your value proposition and what is the willingness to pay. Yeah, this is what actually a classic example of dynamic pricing, how Amazon is doing it. It's also about selling it for the right price at the right moment to the right customer, and you don't have to solely focus on the competition itself. In this case, it's also about introducing willingness to pay and introducing the competition and the demand. So you can buy here the microwave at multiple stores, here Amazon, Source, and Best Buy. But probably all these websites could have a different value in terms of guarantee, logistics, or customer service. So this is how you can integrate this into your pricing model. If we go to the next slide, this is actually how we called with a concept called cross elasticity. You don't always have to be the cheapest in the market. It's also about quantifying the extra value you have, and if you can quantify this, you can change your prices even though you're not the cheapest in the market. So this is where we go beyond purely competitive pricing, but we can also include the value you add with, in this case, Amazon as a brand, but also other value drivers you have in your proposition. I will show you that later in the webinar, how you can apply that into the pricing model. Going back to the presentation, to the next slide. Sorry, to the next topic. So how can you practically you can apply this into practice with cross elasticity, but also with time and willingness to pay. I can best show it to you with an example. Go to the next slide, please. So how e-commerce can use Simpson to implement pricing? Of course, it starts with a good segmentation. So you have products that are very competitive. In this case, we have the Amazon or the microwave product, but we always also have a product which are less competitive. So we often segment these products into key value items and non-key value items, and these products belong to a different pricing strategy. If you have a good product segmentation, you can apply the relevant strategy to that products and change the price. And you can, of course, also include business rules like minimum margins, but also notifications to protect your margins and to keep the prices to a certain range. I think I can best show you how that works in Simpson itself. Go to the next slide. Wait, I'll present my screen. Yes. So going back to the tool here in Simpson itself, how you can apply this into Simpson is that you have two type of strategies. I already explained the key value item strategy and the non-key value item strategy. And how it can work for key value item strategy is that you have a competitor on top of it. So you want to apply or benchmark your price with your key competitors. So you can set in Simpson the key competitors for each product. Then we have the elasticity. So if there is room to change your prices when you have still a good competitor benchmark, you can apply on top of that an elasticity strategy. And it's also combined with a cost. So this is how you can make a strategy in Simpson with key value items and non-key value items, where you have the orange blocks, which are more the fundamentals like competitor, elasticity, and cost. And we have the blue blocks, which are the business rules, and the red ones are the notifications. So what I did right now is that I just made a first strategy for the key value item, and it's always works from top to down. So in this case, we start with a competitor, then it will take a look to the elasticity, then it will take a look at the cost. The minimum margin is applied on top of the cost, and we include a stock check just business rule, which includes the stock position of your product. So you can set different logic according to the velocity of each product. If it has a week on stock, you can make different price than if it has a year or a couple of months on stock. Then I included a price rounding, that you have an attractive price psychology for this product. And the red one is a notification, and it means that you get a notification if the price wants to go below the minimum margin. As I said, it works from top to down, with the exception that the minimum margin is always leading. So even though the competitor price of your competitors goes lower, the minimum margin will always be respected to avoid that you're losing margin with the strategy. Of course, you can take it out, but if you take it in, this is a big condition for applying the strategy. So this is how you can combine different drivers in the strategy. Also apply a cross elasticity strategy with combining competitors and elasticity for the items that are really price sensitive and competitor intensive. It is often combined, the key value item strategy, with a non-key value item strategy. So these are items that are less price sensitive, less competitive, could be sold together with the key value item. Here, we don't take into account the competition because it's less competitive, but we solely focus on the willingness to pay. So we can make, based upon all the order lines in the past, a prediction what will be an optimal price for a higher margin. That if you have an attractive price for your key value items, you can actually compensate the margin with the non-key value items. This strategy is based upon elasticity combined with a cost, of course, also a minimum margin on top of these costs, and a business rule where you have a price change that is kept for each price change, for example, 2 to 3%, so that your price changes are within a certain range and you don't have big differences every time. And we also apply a price rounding for this strategy, that the end price also has a certain price tactic and price psychology to make an attractive offer. So these are two basic strategies where you combine different drivers, key value item and a non-key value item strategy, to apply a dynamic pricing strategy today, taking into account different kind of drivers. So not solely focusing on competition, but having more drivers into your strategy, and applying a very competitive pricing only for your key value item, and compensating actually that lower margin with non-key value items where the price sensitivity is lower. So this is how you can set up a pricing strategy in Simpson, just by combining all these drivers, and by making the price strategy you would like to apply in the market. So this is how it could work in Simpson. I'll stop sharing my screen. Going back to the challenges in the market for dynamic pricing. What we see, what we saw actually in the beginning of the year, is that recently the Dutch company CNA in Dutch, announced that they will close all the corporations with external digital marketplaces, to focus on building on their own. So their reasons for this is that it's cannibalizing with their own sales. So if they apply, or if they work with the big platforms like Amazon and Bob.com, it's cannibalizing with their own channels. It's also a big challenge to work on customer loyalty if you don't own the data, and it's not contributing enough to their margin. So these are their main reasons to stop selling on big platforms. And when it comes to dynamic pricing on this platform, I think it's also a risk to focus solely on the channel that does dynamic pricing for you. Dynamic pricing is so important in playing with the demand and supply for your company, that building your own channel, understanding your optimal price positioning, and having the technology in-house to make your own adjustments and to make it really a strategic advantage for your company. That's a more preferred way of working for a big company like CNA, because you can have better in control about the prices you set. You can have margin protections, but you can also have a better customer insight and have better interventions how to make the customer more loyal with, for example, sharing coupons, or other initiatives that drive customer loyalty. So this is something we see, that more companies are relying on their own channels, on their own technology, to understand the customer behavior themselves. We point out some more challenges what we see with dynamic pricing. The first one is different willingness to pay in the market. So right now, what we see in the economy is that we are dealing with inflation all around the world, and in some countries this leads to a recession. In some companies, it doesn't lead to a recession. So the willingness to pay per consumer really depends on the economic conditions. And it's also important that you can apply your dynamic pricing with this willingness to pay. So you need a technology and also the AI technology that can help you a willingness to pay for each product. And that's a challenge we see in the market when applying dynamic pricing and fully focusing on the competition. Another challenge we see is to comply with all the regulations of Amazon and the Bol.com prices. Companies need to stick to these regulations in order to sell with the buy boxes, but also with other regulations. And sometimes a challenge to comply to these regulations. And another challenge is that companies are solely focusing on the competition. And this also has to do with the definition of dynamic pricing. So if you're fully focusing on the competition, then you have the risk to have a kind of a race to the bottom, so that you're competing for the lowest price in the market, and it's actually a never-ending process. And you see that more and more companies are realizing that and applying the smart business rules to avoid a race to the bottom. So this is why you need to take into account the demand, the supply, the margin KPIs, and also the willingness to pay, to include more factors than just competition, in order to also work on a revenue and margin improvement. Another challenge we see is the speed of execution. This has to do with their infrastructure, to turn market changes quickly into dynamic prices. And also your pricing systems need to have the flexibility to make changes quickly and to add new dimensions for pricing very quickly. So, for example, if you would like to add a new sales channel, and you don't want to wait months for applying a new dynamic pricing strategy for the sales channel, but you just want to duplicate the current pricing algorithm to this new sales channel and make small adjustments. But therefore, you need to have the right systems in place, and also you need to have the right infrastructure. Um, Another challenge we see is the return of investment. As we see companies struggling between having a good balance between the gains you have, the benefits of dynamic pricing, and the cost. And therefore, a good business case need to be made, um, and a good payback time of the dynamic pricing technology, of course. There should be a healthy balance between these two components. The last challenge I would like to share is the communication. I can best explain that with the next slide, the next cartoon, because the question can arise is: do you need to communicate to your customers that you're applying dynamic pricing? And you can see the example here of Wendy's. It's a restaurant in the States that also applied dynamic pricing, and they made this cartoon. We just implemented our new practice of dynamic pricing, so your meal will be $14.94. Oh wait, it's now $19.82. Wait, it's not 88.51. Wait, a lot of confusion. Of course, it's a funny cartoon, but it needs to be clear. Of course, what is the logic behind the dynamic pricing if you want to start with this? And probably for this Wendy's salesman, it's not clear what is the logic. So that's a funny example why the communication of dynamic pricing, if you're applying it, also should be clear. Another example on the next slide you see is an example of course dynamic pricing in the airline industry. Here it's well-known example that if you're booking a ticket 3 months before to New York, and you pay a totally different price than if you book it 20 hours, 24 hours before. It all has to do with the capacity. And it's also now completely accepted that people are paying a different price according to this capacity. So it's completely clear if you are a travel company and you're applying dynamic pricing, consumers already expect and know that you could pay a different price. And the reason is very clear because the capacity is a very good reason to play with the supply and demand and to play with the price to get the airplane fully booked with price discrimination. So here it's already accepted. In other industries, it's less accepted. But I think the lesson learned for your communication is that you would like to avoid confusion. And you can do that by clearly explaining what factors are part of the dynamic pricing model. And also focus on positive communication. So another example on the next slide you see is also a very positive initiative for dynamic pricing. It's sorry for the English international people here, but it's an example in Holland where he had the biggest supermarket chain here, Albert Heijn, that applied dynamic pricing to avoid waste. So you can get more discounts the closer you are to the expiration date. And this is a very clear reason to give extra discount. It's also very positive for the consumer to pay a lower price when it's closer to the expiration date. So this is an example how you can be transparent into the dynamic pricing, but also be very, very positive for the customer and have a win-win situation for supermarket chain and your customers. The last of the fourth topic of this webinar is how to implement dynamic pricing. Going to the next slide, please. So it often works in phases. If you have a dynamic pricing model, it often starts with a kind of an idea. And this idea could be that you want to apply the pricing model based upon the supply and demand and to other factors. So first, you work out the idea, and with this idea, we can start with a proof of concept. This proof of concept is done on a very low scale. So you try to make the technology feasible and the business case feasible, and then you can start in the next phase to really pilot this. So in terms of implementation, we often first start with a pilot scope. This can be a country, this can be a small group of products where you pilot with the dynamic pricing model and critically evaluate the success of dynamic pricing, and also evaluate if you miss some factors and if all the expectations were met. If this first pilot case for a specific group of products or a specific country or specific sales channel was successful, then we can scale it up, and scale it up in such a way that, yeah, also adjustments per dimension, per sales channel, per country can be made. The point I want to make here is that if you want to apply dynamic pricing, yeah, you need to do it in the right steps so that you can learn, learning by doing, and actually start with a big idea, but start small and then scale up when successfully. If you go to the next slide, you see that, yeah, the lesson learned of our dynamic pricing implementation is that it's like the innovation space. It's a well-known concept in innovation that 75% of the success comes from the organization, the soft side of the innovation, and the other 25% comes more from the technology. And the same can be applied actually in dynamic pricing, because this 75% of the soft side really depends on how have you organized the processes. Is there a clear process of how the dynamic pricing model should behave? What steps should be taken? Are the product groups good defined? Are they segmented in the right groups? Are the right capabilities in place? Are there good evaluation metrics? So these are all concepts that need to be arranged by the organization. And of course, if we have the right processes, the right data will flow in. And this input is really important for having the right output with the algorithm. So these three components really define the success of a successful dynamic pricing. And it's not solely the data, it's not solely the algorithm. It's always working the organization, the technology, and the data. They're working hand in hand. And the weakest link is defines actually the success. So if that's the data, then we also don't see a success in the dynamic pricing model as an output. But also from the organization, you need to have this as a focus in your pricing strategy and into your organization to spend time in evaluating and also in adapting the pricing model when needed. Last section I would like to share is more about our vision. It's a bit related to the three elements of data, organization, and the technology. Can we go to the next slide? Our vision is all about hyperlearning. So when we first started as a company, we saw that companies solely focusing on a lot of spreadsheets or a lot of technology itself, and the only stakeholder that was learning was actually the expert who was managing this tool. And our vision is that you can introduce multiple learning loops in the organization, because the faster you learn as an organization, the more strategic advantage you can have compared to your competitors. So what are we doing with hyperlearning is that we introduce multiple learning loops in the organization, where by building your dynamic pricing model and applying that to the right products, you get feedback from the system about what is a good price. So this is what we call expert learning. It's here in the middle of the circle. Then another learning loop we add is the organization. So when you introduce a dynamic pricing system such as Simpson, you see that you get feedback from all kind of perspective of what is a good price. You can also get the insights of what is the impact of each driver of dynamic pricing model, so that more stakeholders such as finance, marketing, e-commerce, but also operations, IT, can learn what is a good price and what is the price buildup of the price dynamic price algorithm. The last learning loop we introduce is the expert learning loop, the machine learning loop, and herefore we also take into account all the order lines of the past. So we can calculate this. We can use this to calculate, for example, the price elasticity and the willingness to pay. So here we have three learning loops: expert learning, organizational learning, and machine learning. And this is what we call hyperlearning, where we have all these learning loops together, where you make really dynamic pricing core of your organization, and introduce dynamic pricing into not specifically only your pricing organization, but having a wider approach for making it a learning organization. This was an first introduction to dynamic pricing, but as we said, we would like to make this webinar very interactive. So if you have any questions, then this is the time to go through these questions. We have still 10 minutes left to answer your questions. You can use the chat for putting your questions in the comments. It has some delay, so we will go to the questions after we've seen them. I see now one question coming up from Anne. Thank you, Anne. What kind of data do we need to implement dynamic pricing? This is a really good question. This really depends on, of course, your market. It's really dependent on what data is really needed. So with Simpson, we make a separation between internal data and external data. And internal data could be, of course, the order lines of your history. So what is sold for which product, which margin, which price, which customer, which channel. This is needed to calculate the willingness to pay. On the other hand, we need external data to make the combinations in your strategy. So therefore, we need, of course, competition. We have different ways to get the competition prices from the market. We can do that via scraping. We can do that via AEN search, manufacturing search, but also for keyword search. And we could also include other external sources, for example, commodity prices, weather, or kind of public sources which are available in the market. We often discuss this case by case to see what data points are really important for your market. But in general, internal and external data can be taken into account for your pricing model. Another question is how to prevent a race to the bottom with your competitors. This is also a question we often get. So if you have a very competitive pricing strategy, it first starts with having a good price positioning. What is your price positioning and what is your added value in the market? Are you more discounter or are you more premium based seller in the market? And if you can quantify this, if you're a premium seller in the market, then this is very important to make your price decisions and make your price automations, because then you don't have to be the cheapest in the market. Maybe for some key value items you want to be very attractive, but it's really important to also have to not actually price according to a race to the bottom strategy. If you have a clear premium position in the market, if you choose for being a discounter, of course, then you want to be very competitive. But Simpson helps you to be very competitive on the products that are very sensitive and competitive, competitor intensive, and being less competitive and having more a margin optimization strategy for the products that are less competitive intensive. So you prevent a short answer, you prevent a race to the bottom by having a clear price positioning and applying different pricing strategies for each of the products that have a different competitive intensity. Rohit, are these principles only applicable to e-commerce companies? Yeah, yes and no. I think the principles I just shared was mainly focused on e-commerce, of course. We see that e-commerce in general is a little bit easier to start a dynamic pricing because the market is accepting more dynamic pricing strategy. But we also apply dynamic pricing for B2B companies, although you see that the price changes are less frequent. So you're not going to change it every day, but you change it depending on the market accepts. So it could be that you do it once a month or once a week, depending on the market circumstances. So it's also applicable to B2B. However, yeah, the variables could be different. So that's the short answer. I think it's good to know as a company from Simpson that we have 50% of our companies is B2B and 50% B2C. We see a lot of similarities in how you're organizing your pricing models, but you need to be flexible for your dynamic pricing strategy if you're e-commerce or if you are a B2B company. So we are known and we have experience in both sides of the markets. If there are not more questions, sometimes it has some delay for the questions on LinkedIn. But if there are more questions which I see later on LinkedIn, then I will answer them personally on LinkedIn. So I will get back to you. And if you have any more questions that you don't want to share here on LinkedIn, you can easily contact me on within my LinkedIn profile so that we can start a one-on-one to go through your dynamic pricing case. Yeah, this was the end of the presentation. If you have any questions later, you know where to find us. Really thank you for being here as an attendee. We're looking forward to stay in touch or to meet you at one of our face-to-face events or one of our demos. Right now, I would like to thank you for your time. I'm looking forward to continue the conversation about the dynamic pricing. Thanks a lot and have a great day.